Hi, I am Miss Alana Bear, and today I'm going to be talking about what will be going on in my high school classroom for sophomore English at Asheville High School. So I want to start a little bit with who I am. I graduated from Western Carolina University in December of 2025 with my undergrad in BSED and English Studies. I'm originally from St. Augustine, Florida, and I moved to the Asheville area about 3.5 years ago. And I also thought I would include one of my favorite poets, who is Mary Oliver. Her poem, The Summer Day, is one of my favorite poems by her, and I do plan on teaching it in the class. And then I also have available my contact information, my email, and then my phone number if you need to reach me at any time. So I first want to start up a little bit about my key beliefs as a teacher. I have here is my teaching statement in philosophy. So to touch on that a little bit, I believe that curating an active learning environment in my classroom is key. I want my students to feel challenged to practice and hone their strengths and skills during their learning. And I want to involve the teachings of social awareness and responsible decision making as a whole class. And if we practice social awareness, I think that we can all recognize our strengths in others and identify diverse social norms. And then if responsible decision making is included, I think my students and I can identify solutions for personal or social problems, utilize our critical thinking skills as a group or individually, and express open-mindedness together. And my teaching philosophy falls in line with progressivism. So I believe in a student-centered learning environment where my students can take what they've learned in my classroom and apply it to their life outside of school or in other classrooms or other social situations that might happen in the school setting. So my aspects of a culturally responsive classroom includes these three things as being my top priority. So validation for my students, empowering my students, and having a multidimensional way of learning. So to talk a little bit about the validating aspect of this, I want my students to feel as though they are gaining validation from myself and their classmates with their cultural background, their values, their ideas, their beliefs, and personal experiences. So during instruction time, what I plan on doing is asking my students for their input on the topics being discussed during the lesson. So if we're beginning a lesson, I will ask if any of the students already know some information about whatever the topic is we're discussing. And I want my students to feel that when they're being engaged with, that their input is valuable to the learning process as a whole. And then for empowering, I want to give my students the tools to feel as though they're being successful in the classroom in whatever way that works for them the best, since each student is different. And then I want to reinforce with my students individually and as a whole class on their strengths, and then help them see that they're all just a community that should lift each other up. And I really want to focus on letting my students know what their strengths are and not just what they need to work on, because it's important to make them feel uplifted so that whenever they are facing a challenge head on, it doesn't feel as difficult because they're already being uplifted in a lot of other ways. And then for the multi-dimensional aspect, I understand that not all the students learn the same way. And so I want to give my students different mediums and outlets to consume the information that I'm giving them during the lesson. So I'll always make sure to have a schedule of what we're going to be going over with for the day, for the 90-minute class period. I'm going to provide a PowerPoint that has like brief descriptions of what I'm actively talking about with my students and directions if there's an activity I need them to work on. And then once I'm done with the initial part of the lesson where I'm just teaching the students the content, I'm going to allow them to have hands-on activities so that the students can apply their learnings in an interesting and creative way to ensure that they're really absorbing all the information that's being thrown at them. So a little bit about the routines and procedures. First thing is whenever the students enter into the classroom, I'm going to greet each student by name. I feel like I'm pretty good with names. So I want each student to feel as though they are being seen, ask them how their day is, that kind of thing. And then once they're sitting, I'm going to have the students do a quick 5-minute warm-up. And it's going to be an exciting warm-up, so it could be something where the students are given a few different sentences and the grammar is wrong in some aspect and they have to fix it. Or something like Wordle where they're given multiple different letters and they have to create different words just from the letters given, that kind of thing. And then what I want to do whenever the class period comes to an end is I want to ask at least one student minimum to verbally express what they think they learned today in the classroom. And even if it's not something that was directly related to what I really wanted the students to get out of the lesson, at least they are showing that they're learning something. So another thing is the grouping strategies. I really want my students to have a lot of options to work in pairs or small groups as often as they can. Of course, there's going to be individual time depending on whatever's happening. Usually during lecture time, it'll be independent learning, of course. But I think that learning is a community-based event, so they should be given the opportunity to do that as much as they can. And then for transitions, I think this is a perfect opportunity for my students to get a little break for their 90-minute class period. I mean, they're sitting in the class all day long inside, and that can be really exhausting even if they're not moving around as much. It's just constantly absorbing information. So whenever we're transitioning between, let's say, like a lecture to a small group project, and let's say I have to hand out some papers to the students, I'll give them a quick 2 to 5 minute stretch or talk break. You know, they can talk with their group mates, they can stand up and walk around a little bit. And I think that this will promote an opportunity for my students to feel more comfortable in the classroom. And I think that if they have small breaks, they'll feel more engaged rather than having to have this lengthy 90-minute period of just only learning and only being engaged the entire time. They can do it in spurts, almost. So a little bit about the expectations and consequences of my classroom. I did write down here my classroom mission. So to read it off to you, it states that in this classroom, all members are a part of a community. We would treat each other with respect, strive to better ourselves, and lift each other up at every chance given. This is a learning environment where everyone is accepted and encouraged to grow. So essentially what that'll mean is that I want all my students to feel as though they can learn, that they're not being put down by each other, and basically that they're just accepted, even if not everyone in there is friends. It's just that everyone feels like this is a safe space for them to be in, is in my classroom. So the rules, I want to create a classroom contract at the beginning of the semester, ideally the first day of class. Me and the students will sit down and we'll write down a list of rules and expectations that we want from each other, but some that I will initially be implementing right off the bat that are my own are all students are welcome to ask any appropriate question without interruption. All students will treat each other with respect, and my students and I will go over what respect means to everybody, since that's kind of a broad term. And all students will treat this classroom as a safe space. So if any student is asking a question about the material that's being taught, no one's going to feel as though, they shouldn't ask the question because of something else, someone else said. So all of these will be discussed on the first day of class, and all my students will be able to ask as many questions as they want. And then I will make sure that all of this is written down clearly on a big piece of poster, based on the class period, and placed at the front of the classroom. And then, of course, at some point, these rules might be broken. And I don't want to immediately reprimand the student who's breaking the rules. And I don't want to call them out in front of all their peers. So what I plan on doing is, if I recognize that someone's breaking the rules that me and my students have established, I will pull the student aside towards the end of the classroom, and I'm going to ask them, like, why did they break the rule? And then what steps we can take to avoid that happening again. Basically, I don't want my students to feel shame in the class as much as we can help it. So the classroom description, since I really want to implement group activities and pairs and things like that, I want my desks to be set up in small groups. And I have a picture available here. This is just a general idea. It's not verbatim what it's going to look like. But basically, if the desks are already put in small groups, there'll be less time for students to have to move around or find partners. Let's say one student feels as though they don't really have a group they can go in, they're already in a group. And this can rotate throughout the semester depending on if the students want that to happen, or if one group seems a little more disruptive or they're not fully engaging in the lesson, then I might switch up the seating. But it'll all be up for discussion typically, since this is not just my classroom, it's a whole community. And then during activity time or reading time, I think it's really great to have a reading rug where I'm going to have some sitting pillows for the students so they can just relax and not have to sit in their desk, because again, they're sitting in desks all day. So giving them a comfy area to be in would be really helpful for the students to feel comfortable. And then I also plan on having a bookcase near the reading area where it's going to have all the books that I'm already planning on teaching in the classroom. And then I also want to have some other young adult novels that I'm not teaching but are also available in the library, but they can have them available in my classroom. If they catch up on their reading and now they need something else to read, there are plenty of other books for them to read there. So they can just grab one. If they want to take it home, they will just sign their name with me on a sheet so I know who has the book at what time. And yeah, so that will be generally what the classroom will look like. I also really want to have a space on the wall for student work. So whenever we have projects where the students are doing a little bit of art involving, I typically will have projects where we will read a novel, or the students will read a novel of their choice, and then they'll have some sort of artistic, creative project that goes alongside that. And if the student wants, gives me permission to put their work on the wall, I would love to do that so they can show off their hard work. And that's generally what my high school classroom will look like for sophomore English.